start with. Making sure I have a little bit of water in the colors that I want to use.
That's a good term for it, waking up your paint.
And this paint has been in here for a very long time, and I never clean my palette. Occasionally I'll clean the wells, but you just keep adding to it. That's the beauty of watercolor. You never waste it, basically.
And if you want to use a china plate as a palette, that works too.
So basically I'm going to be trying to start with this one, and my interpretation will look nothing like that, except for maybe the outside shapes, because I'm interpreting that flower. I'm not doing it exactly as it looks there. So it's an artistic representation instead of a perfect rendition, I suppose.
And that's kind of a cup, that flower.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll let you decide. Yeah.
Oh yeah, all the petals come from the life source, which is the stem, and point out the sepal, those little green leaves off to the sides.
These?
Yeah.
Yep.
So
These right here.
the petals all start from right here, whether they're the back petals, the side petals, and once you get that, your flower makes sense.
Right. So everything starts from the same spot. I'm going to start off a little bit dark. And like I said before, I always muddy up my colors slightly because that's just me.
She's the dirty one.
I'm the dirty one. I like to start in here in the center.
C curves, little C curves.
And some of them are just little dots. Just getting it started. And then I'm not dipping back into the paint because I want it to be a lighter color. There's pretty much water on here. And then I'll lightly touch that and it bleeds up into it. It's even darker than I want it to be. So I'll just keep adding more water to it. Dip back in a little bit. So right now I'm working my way up here.
So she's borrowing color from some of the other marks.
And I'm always leaving white on the edges of the flowers because basically that's my tape, if you want to say that, and keeps it looking fresh and separates it. So I want to add a little bit of darker color over here. Going slow, little by little.
It's almost like you squint at the reference and kind of let it blur so you can just interpret it.
So right now you can kind of see this petal right here. I'm going to get that dark area down there. And this doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, it's not going to really look a whole lot like that when I'm done. So I've got my outline there. I don't want that petal to be dark at all. I just want it to bleed up a little bit. So I just basically use water and borrow from down here and let it blend up.
And you notice she did not draw anything. This is freestyle.
While it's wet, I like adding pops of color, especially pink up here, maybe even in the tip down here, and just watch what happens as that goes. So that's kind of like, oh yeah, do that before I move on. So now I'll try to work on this petal here. Try to get some of those folds in there, little texture. And then drop in that.
Things aren't drying quite as fast as they did yesterday. Yesterday, oh my gosh.
That got a little crazy on
With
me.
the humidity, I thought it was going to be much more difficult for things to dry.
So basically I have that side done. I'm gonna add a little pop of pink down here and make that, clean up that edge a little bit. Add a little bit of color up here. Now, before I go any further, I want my green in there because you'll see what happens. It
Drum roll.
has to be wet. So I start my stem and I just lightly kiss that area there, and I want that to go up there. And I don't want any more, so I'm not going to touch it again, but I'm making this a little bit thicker. And while that's wet, I'm going to add a little bit of interest by adding some just burnt umber, and then add some a little bit of leaf stems here for later on. So now I got to go back to my flower. I need a little more color in there. Add my little pop of pink. And I'm going to let that go. Do the one behind it here. And I'm not touching down here because if I do, it'll bleed. I don't want it to. I do want this to come over just slightly. Just water on my brush. I'm going to steal from over here and push it over there. Make it a little more interesting. Your paint goes a long way. The water helps it move.
That's the fun thing about watercolor. You can just push it around. It's cool.
So, I have this a little bit darker than I want right there. So I basically get all the water out of my brush. And then I lift.
So she's lifting it.
And I need a little bit of pop of pink in there just because.
What are the colors you're mixing?
So I am using Opera Rose and Scarlet Red. And that looks cool just like that.
It does. It
And
does.
I barely did anything, I feel like. So I'm gonna let that dry. I'm gonna work on some leaves now. Later on you can go back in, add a little yellow if you want to. I'm gonna add some darks. But you know, people think that this is an accident. Nope.
It's on purpose.
That's on purpose. That is the coolest thing ever. I love it.
The green bleeding upward?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is cool.
It's, yeah. So basically, to make my leaf, like Jenny said, I'm getting fat and then little and skinny. And then I like to leave the center white. And then sometimes I perfect it a little bit. And then, because I'm me, I add color.
See how she's just tapping dark into it?
I always like to add a little bit of, whoops. Okay, so that's not a mistake, like she said. We'll just add another leaf.
There you go.
Yeah. I'm not particular where I get my shadow colors. It's just do whatever's in your palette, basically. So this leaf will be a little bit darker.
And she pretty much knows what color she's going to get. If you want to test it before you commit it, you can tap it on your scratch paper to see both the color and how much water you've got.
And just to add some interest, get a little bit of a different green in there and a little bit more water. Push that back like it's behind it. So water is your friend. don't be afraid to not have enough color on your brush, basically.
I love that one on the right. It's just an indication of a leaf, just a
This,
shadowy,
yeah.
shadowy leaf.
So I want to get another thing going up here.
So she didn't touch that green into the flower because it's coming from behind, so the bleed would not make sense.
So now I'm going to try to work on a little bud. This little leaf is kind of skinny. Back to this glorious pink and red color, which I just adore. Didn't dip back in there. I'm letting it bleed from up here and down here, and it's totally enough color. So now I need a little more green. So I don't want it to, oops.
I like it.
I don't want it to touch up there yet. Oh, we'll just add something there. So I want it to just kind of go around it here, but I do want it to touch here. And we'll see what happens. So that's totally fine. Lift it up.
I kind of liked it.
Add a little, yeah, like it's coming behind.
Cool.
So there's no mistakes. You just fix it.
Mistakes.
And a little bit more green. Let's see.
So how do you know when you're done?
Great question.
Everybody claps.
Beautiful.
Is that good to start with, or do you want me to keep going?
I think that's great. I bet you they're itching to get started.
I want to write Hallmark on it.
Oh, thank you. So
Looking at it
if you
upside down.
if you feel like, sometimes I feel like if you watch somebody and you're like, oh, I totally got that, I know what to do, and then you get back and you're like,
Yeah.
So why don't you all get started, and then we'll give it about 10 or 15 minutes, and if you want, I'll come back and I'll demonstrate this one, and then that'll help solidify everything.
That's a great idea.
Okay?
How do you take this off?
Here,
Yes.
I can do this.
And you can just use your own piece.
Here, try this one instead.
Water.
Oh,
Definitely. I have.
And stick it about halfway in, and then that makes it a little easier. Thank you. So I
have to be so brave.
You do. You really do.
To be very
And it's, you know what, this paper is just pennies. Don't worry about,
right.
you know, spending a lot of money, ruining it, whatever. This is all practice.
Oh, can I
Very,
use
very
that
pretty.
also?
I'm sorry, what? Oh, sure.
Look at the photograph.
What?
Thank you.
So these were little C strokes in the beginning, the dark ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I take that? Is that okay to take a photo? Or?
Sure.
I might be able to look at that easier than
Jenny, we're using this.
it's not
Well,
as.
there's an ice pitcher in there with water if you want.
So how do you leave it up and just hit down?
Go into your settings, and then under brightness and something.
Display.
Yeah, display and brightness, and then auto lock.
Oh, I have
it's,
5
it's
minutes.
like never or something, never. And then later you'll have to change
Mine
that back.
didn't have a never, but it had a 10 minutes.
Oh, well that
so-
works.